I think he said good morning.
Do we have any FSU fans in the house? Did you stay up and watch that heartbreaker last night? I did. So, do we have any Miami Hurricane fans in the house? Well, we'll see what happens next week. But we were hoping they'd both be undefeated going into that. So it's all good, though.
All right, good. Listen, we got some questions we're going to ask the governor, the first lady, and the lieutenant governor. Okay? So stand by. This is for the governor. Governor, what do you see as the next step to continue strengthening law enforcement and keeping Florida one of the safest states in the nation?
Well, one, I mean, we're going to have to create some type of a process to accommodate all the NYPD who are going to flood out of there if this guy gets elected mayor. I wouldn't want to work for him. Now, look, I think that, look, I'm out there. I'm usually kind of the face of it. I'm the leader. It's great. I'm happy to do it. But I think sometimes people don't realize Florida's kind of our moxie on law enforcement, law and order. That was not like universal that people were supporting me on all that. I mean, when I became governor, there was a move in the legislature, Democrats and Republicans, to eliminate our truth in sentencing laws. So, you got to serve 85% of your sentence. You do the crime, you do the time. They wanted to reduce that to, I think, about 60. That would have allowed 9,000 felons to be eligible for release. And it's my view, you put felons back on the street prematurely, you are going to have an increase in criminal activity. You are going to have more victims of crimes. And so there's been move to mimic California on some of these things. This is legislation that has been in there. And when I became governor, it was like really hot. It was kind of trendy. You do have some of these ideological donors that push this stuff, and they believe in it. And while I disagree with it, I mean, I think some of them truly believe it. And I just put the kibosh on it. I was like, nope, not happening on my watch. And so we killed that. And I've had to veto, probably about a half a dozen what I call jailbreak bills over the course of my tenure. Not all as dramatic as the eliminating truth in sentencing, not all as dramatic as some of the ones that they wanted to do for California-style retail theft policies and everything else. California, you can steal $999, and you just keep going about your business, and they don't do anything about it. We enacted the strongest string of retail theft laws in the country. I signed those in a couple years ago. But this was something, and so I've had to veto this stuff. So I do think that we've obviously shown that it works, what we're doing, but I do think that you do see a drive and a push, a little bit more under the surface, not something people want to campaign on because they know voters won't like it, but like, why is it that I had to veto these bills? Why is it that I even had to put the kibosh on eliminating truth and sentencing? Why did I have to do all those things? So I think that is something, don't retrench. Don't act like somehow, because people say, oh, well, crime rate's at a 50-year low. It just shows, quote, we have too many people in prison. No, it shows that because we put bad people in prison, that's why the crime rate is low. So we got to stick to what works. I think it's very important. I'm proud of, look, some of your agencies utilize our bonus program, the $5,000 bonus. It's not just when people flee Chicago or New York. Yes, they get it. But we give it to the new the young people too, because what I saw during the BLM era and all that was a real, you still see it today, but a real attempt to delegitimize the vocation of law enforcement, to demonize law enforcement. Well, who the hell's going to want to go into it if you're going to be treated like crap, like you are in some of these other parts of the country? So in Florida, yes, the 5,000 is important. People can use that, but it's really a testament that we view this as a noble profession. So the younger people who are doing this have an incentive to go. So I want to continue that. I had to fight in the legislature to keep that going. Everyone has been viewed it as successful. Honestly, it's chump change in terms of the overall budget, and we've got a massive surplus, and we do massive tax cuts and all this stuff. So, but why would we have had to have fought for that? How come I had to fight tooth and nail to get increases for Florida Highway Patrol. I mean, these guys are not paid high enough just to keep them, right? Like, here's the thing, like, yeah, pay more because we appreciate what you do. Yeah, I believe in that. But there's also just the practical thing. You've got to keep these people wanting to come and stay there. They can do so much better elsewhere. It doesn't work. So we did that. I proposed a big increase, and I had to fight. There was no increase with the Florida House of Representatives. So I think that we're a law and order state. We've shown it works. I've been proud to stand with law enforcement, even when it wasn't as trendy, because, during the whole COVID, BLM era, all that, they were basically, it was trendy for these politicians to go squawking against law enforcement. And you never saw that here in Florida, because I understand, how important it is. So just understand, this stuff is not on autopilot. This stuff does require leadership. And I am the first one to always give credit to the people that are actually on the ground making it happen, because I can say all the right things, do policies. People aren't willing to put on the uniform and risk their lives. It's all for naught. But I also know this. You could be dedicated. You could have great police departments. If you have bad policies where they're kneecapping you at every turn, like we see in other states, I don't care how good you aren't going to be able to succeed under those. So we have a very good, I think, formula here in Florida. We should simply build on that formula going forward, and I think we're going to continue to see reductions in crime, and I think you're going to see Florida continue to be a place where people who are in law enforcement really have high quality of life and career satisfaction.
Thank you, Governor. You mentioned the troopers, how you did push for those raises. We got probation, we got corrections. We can't forget about them this year.
Well, we've done corrections. We know we got to do more. And again, that's just a practical insight. I mean, we were losing people in corrections to like Wawa and some of this stuff, right? And like, honestly, if you can, I mean, like, have you ever had Wawa subs? It's pretty good. If you can make more money at Wawa, and you don't have to worry about some felon assaulting you, or at least not as often. I mean, like, you understand why people do that. So yeah, we've done a lot. We supplemented. We proposed more this year, and we'll continue to do that.
Thank you. And don't forget, many members in here and on the executive board, we were the first ones to endorse the governor for his first race when everybody else kind of sat back. We knew you were going to be a winner, okay? This is for the First Lady. How do you encourage young people who are considering careers in public service to take the next step?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is just get out and go try to do an internship and try to get involved and go learn more. You're going to learn a lot in school. Hopefully you apply yourself, you get good grades, you do the best job that you can. But I wouldn't be sitting here if it weren't for internships and the opportunities to be able to go out and kind of get my hands dirty and figure out what I liked and what I didn't like. And a quick story, I had a chance, this was about a month ago, that I went on a ride-along with FHP with the illegal immigration folks. You want to talk about, now that was fun. I got to sit in the front seat. I got to play with all kinds of technology. It was really cool. I was impressed that he could drive a little bit and, press the computer, but keep focused, 10 and 2. It was great. But they said at one point in time, they're like, do you want to cuff somebody? I said, excuse me? I said, I don't know. I'll try. So, whatever. And they go, you know what? And this was like a guy who had an active warrant for meth or whatever, so it was fine. So they said, well, okay, maybe not cuff, because they could tell I was a little bit like apprehensive. I have never done that before. And then they said, well, maybe double cuff him. I thought, well, what in the heck does that mean? I'm going to double cuff him, and then they give me a stick. I'm like, what do I do with this stick thing? So there's some pretty funny photos that I'll put out there at some point in time showing me, I'm going to land the plane and get to the point of the story in a second, but getting, doing all of this, and, it was really just like a dose of reality of what law enforcement, what you guys have to deal with every single day, because, when I'm getting out of the car, this guy is already in handcuffs, but just imagine what you guys are rolling up on all the time. You have no idea what somebody has in their car or on their persons, or if they're going to come after you, or you don't know. And it just was like, for me, it was so and I've done these before, and it's a constant reminder of just you guys putting yourselves in harm's way for the betterment of the community and for us and for families, for my kids, for our family, for people across the state, and it's very admirable. So long-winded way of saying, if there are folks out there that want to be able to get involved in something, the honorable profession of law enforcement, just go out there and get your hands dirty and learn and realize how I think really rewarding and special of a profession it is.
Thank you, First Lady. This is for the Lieutenant Governor. I know the answer to this one. Many others do also. And don't forget, when he was a state senator, he was a hero for us, and we appreciate that, all right? You made a good choice. How do you personally stay connected with the men and women serving in uniform?
Well, Kaz, that is a great question.
Thank you.
It's one that I love deep down inside my core. You never forget where you came from, right? We are who we are, and we have to stand for what we believe in. That is what made our nation, what made our state exactly what it is. I see what you do. We collectively see what you do. We see the sacrifice, we see the hours, we see the time. But we don't always, I think, as a state or as a people, always reflect on the person behind the badge enough. We talk about how hard the job is, the responsibility, the risk. That's all real. You know that. You sign up for it. You volunteer for that. But what we don't talk about is that your moms and dads, husbands and wives, and you got to go take your kid to soccer practice after this as well, right? That's the story. That's the person. Those are the people that we have to step up and step in and protect. So when I talk about things like time, tools, training, it's because you deserve everything to go back, protect our state, protect our community. It's amazing. But we have to make sure we protect you as well. And I want you to know without equivocation that we, as a state, the governor, the first lady, myself, our entire state, we have your back. We do, because what you do matters. So how do we connect? I think it's very simple. The equation is clear. You say what you mean what you say, then you follow up and do things the right way. You get things done. That track record of success is why Florida is where it's at. We got to keep that path moving forward.
Thank you, sir.
Florida, of all 50 states, we are the only state in America that has a governor and a lieutenant governor who are military veterans.
There you go.
You think you did more. But what the lieutenant governor, I refer to him as the Chuck Norris of Florida politics because he was a Green Beret for 23 years, Special Missions Unit, Special Forces. But after 18 years, he lost one of his legs and, had a decision to make about his future. He decided that he would he'd be the first one in the history of the Army to re-qualify for Special Forces using a prosthetic leg. And that's not easy to do because it's hard to qualify to begin with. So he was able to do that, and then he served 5 more years as a Green Beret with a prosthetic leg. Has been a great state senator. I mean, many of you have worked with him. He's been great on all the issues and been very supportive of our agenda. But then, like most recently, we had the Iran-Israel conflict, and we had a lot of people who had friends, family, loved ones over there. A lot of students were over there just studying or doing things. There's church groups were over there. And, because we've done this before with our emergency response, with Floridians, when something like that happens, they don't think to go to the State Department, they think go to us, right? Because we figure out a way to do it. We did it after October 7th. We did it in Haiti. We've done it in other hurricanes, all this stuff. So we authorized rescue missions. We got thousands of people out of the airport was closed. There were ballistic missiles coming down. We got thousands of people out. Jay personally flew over, and he was on the ground rescuing people in the midst of all that. It ended up bringing back a lot of people to safety. So it just shows you, it's like, some people talk, and then some people act. And he's been a man of action, and that's a good thing.
Well, you have 3 vets up here. I know we got the Army, Navy, and the Marines, and I think a little before you all, but here for the vets, all right? Governor, this one's for you. You've made monumental investments into Florida law enforcement. How will Florida investments in law enforcement translate to stronger support for officers and safer communities?
Well, look, I think that it's said that the U.S. 50 states it's a laboratories for democracy because California can make choices, New York, Florida, and all that, and there's always been differences, right? I mean, New York's always had higher taxes than we've had, Illinois, all this stuff. There's different approaches to things like school choice or whatever, but I don't think we've seen such a dramatic difference in how states have approached issues than we've had just during my tenure as governor. Part of it is COVID, part of it is some of the social movements that were going on and all that stuff. And so we've all had to lead and institute policies, but we're now in a position we can judge those results, right? So is Minnesota better off for having attacked law enforcement? No. Is Chicago better off for having cut their police budget a few years ago? No. Is New York City better for what they were doing, to be hostile to NYPD? No. Is Florida better because of our support for law enforcement, our support for strong policies? Yes. There's no question about that. And I don't ask people to move here. I mean, there's some governors that, oh, please come to my state, whatever. I don't do that. I mean, we've got a lot of people, right? I mean, like when people come, there's benefits sometimes, but there's also can be, more traffic. So I'm agnostic about it. It's a free state, it's a free country. People can move, but people have fled a lot of those jurisdictions to Florida. Yes, no income tax here. Yes, we were open during COVID. Yes, all this stuff, schools, whatever. But the number one reason people give when you talk to realtors about why'd you buy a house in Florida and leave these places, public safety. They didn't feel safe in those other communities. And so what you guys are doing is something that is really foundational to whether a society can succeed or not. And yes, people can do certain policies in these other states that I may not agree with, but that some of those bad policies aren't enough to cause people to uproot their lives and move to a different state. Public safety is primal. If you don't have your families don't feel safe, you don't believe your kids are safe, your loved ones are safe, you are going to do something about it. And so I think this has been a great experiment. I think it's worked out very poorly for some of these other states, but I think part of the reason that we've done so well is because we've understood the importance of public safety. We've done everything we can to support the people who are out there on the ground doing the tough work day after day. And when the political winds shift, the thing about me is you don't got to worry about that. I don't follow those winds, right? Like I put my stake in the ground, and that's what I'm going to do. So when it was trendy to go out and protest against the police in the summer of 2020, you never saw me at any of those protests. No, I mean, I was back in law enforcement because that's just what I believe is right. And so we're going to continue to do that. So we've got great opportunity. We've got a great formula. It hits me what we do here because sometimes when you're in the nitty gritty of it, you're just focusing on whatever your next thing is or whatever. But I'll never forget two things, both in California. One, a few years ago, I'm walking the streets of San Francisco. I got a news crew because we're looking. People are actually defecating on the sidewalk, using drugs. It was really a disaster. And some of these San Franciscans, not necessarily politically in tune with me, some of them weren't necessarily receptive to me being there, but the cops did a beeline over to me and were thanking me. I had never done anything for them, but they were thanking me for what we're doing in Florida to stand up for the profession and stand up for the police officers. And it was really meaningful that they wanted support like that, and they don't necessarily get that. And then I was getting off, I got off a plane in Southern California. I was greeted by a police chief for one of the cities, very affluent city. And I'm like, how you doing, man? He's like, I'm doing great, Governor, but all my police officers want to move to Florida now. And that wasn't maybe true 10 years ago. So I think what we do here is important, for the people in this room, but it has set an example around the country. You do have people say, hey, why don't you do what Florida's doing? How come they're supporting us? Why aren't you doing that? And that's what we've got to really keep going because the facts are clear, the results are in, and Florida's shown the way.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor, this one's for you. What are your top priorities when it comes to supporting law enforcement officers in the state of Florida?
Yet another good question. I love that. So, all right. I think when I frame this up, I want to talk just a little bit about a couple things that the governor actually just hit on, and I'll bring it in for a landing. as the First Lady said there a bit ago. So, you know, I was in California recently. You might have seen it. We brought back that person from California who killed 3 Floridians, right? Made sure that he would face justice. When we're on the ground there, you would not believe how many of the troopers, how many of the law enforcement stopped us and said, you know, thank you for what you're doing in Florida. Thank you for having law enforcement's back. We want to move to Florida. Guys, we're not recruiting, but they're coming because we take care of our people. We stand by them, and we make sure that when you do your job, you don't have to wonder if we have your back. You unequivocally know the truth because we are there. That's important. That standard must never deviate. You must always know that your state government has your back. If we fail to do that, we're just failing. So the next piece is this. You know, I was in the military. I loved doing what I did as a Green Beret. I mean, I got to jump out of airplanes, shoot guns. You know, it was pretty amazing. And but I started as an E2. I started as an E2 private. I wasn't an officer. I was an enlisted man. I started off doing basic tasks. I started off not having enough money to pay everything we needed to and having to make tough choices. I started off in a time in 1996 when we didn't have enough things to train with. We didn't have rounds. We couldn't go to the range. We couldn't get better at what we did. We were literally going to downrange Fort Carson in NTC and saying bang, bang, bang. Guys, that's not training. You can't prepare for what life takes at you when you can't really train. You have to prepare before that moment. So when I talk about time, tools, and training, it's because I've been there. I have buried friends who have lost everything, gave that last full measure for our nation abroad, simply because they believed in something. Now, when we were fighting the war on terror, they had everything they needed. The money was there, the training was there, and the support was there. But it was very hard when the war started. It really was, because we were fighting the last war. We hadn't always had all the money to train. We didn't have all the kit that we needed. I will tell you, there were times in Afghanistan when we were driving things that looked like they came from Mad Max, because we were cutting things off of vehicles that had been left in Afghanistan and Iraq, welding them on for armor. I don't want you guys to have to live through that here in our state. You deserve everything. You deserve a living wage, a good wage. You put yourself at risk, corrections. You put yourself at risk in terms of what you do, probation. You know, we went out there on the bike and went on foot. We need to get out there on the bike. I've been out there with law enforcement in their cars, walking around, seeing the impact of what you do. You deserve everything and anything to do that. But the other side of it is this. We can never go backwards. We will always be a state that's tough on crime, and we hold people accountable. Because the last thing that we want is to deviate and allow criminality to grab root. The governor just hit on one of those key things. People are happy. They feel safe because Florida has led on these issues. Leadership matters. The wrong type of leadership can destroy this state quicker than anything else. We have been so blessed to have the GOAT here for the last 6.5 years. We got to keep on that path. And the last thing I'll tell you is this. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. I need y'all to tell me. I need you to tell me what works. The last thing I want to do is have a legislator or somebody else or anybody else tell you what's going to work. I want to hear it from you. I want to hear the facts. You know, I want to know what it is that is making it hard for you to do your job. Because go back to time, tools, training. I got to make sure that we clear up the roadblocks ahead of you so you get back home to your family safely. Those are the things that are important, and that is my promise and pledge to you.
Thank you. First Lady, how can leadership at the state and community level help law enforcement officers stay mentally strong and supported on the job?
Well, you just heard it. I mean, that's it. I mean,
but
you've
yeah,
got
we
the
want to hear
goat.
it from you.
Okay, well, I mean, listen, ditto and ditto, right? Like everything that the GOAT has done, and it's true. Like you look at a lot of these states, you look at California, you look at New York, you look at this mayor, a guy who said that public safety was at threat because of law enforcement, and he wants to defund law enforcement. I mean, that is going to lead to more crime. That's going to lead to an exodus of law enforcement, you know, coming to Florida, getting the bonuses, which will be great for us. I mean, we welcome more law enforcement here. But the policies are really so important. When you start embracing soft on crime, giving the benefits to the criminals at the expense of law-abiding citizens and law enforcement, That's problematic. That's what reverts the state. And so the positions that he's taken and the lieutenant governor has doubled down on, I think are incredibly important to the future of this state. As a mom of an 8, 7, and a 5-year-old, I will never forget in 2020 when you had all of the riots, and I was at the house at the governor's mansion, very blessed and honored to be there, but I had a 3-month-old baby at the time, and he was gone. He was down doing, I think, a launch. There was like a space shuttle launch down in the Cape, and I'm there. Now, granted, I'm not alone per se, because we have the wonderful Florida Department of Law Enforcement, who are wonderful public servants who, I mean, just the best of the best out there protecting us. And I remember looking out the window, and I opened up the blinds, and I see a mob of about 200 or 300 people marching around the corner to protest in front of the governor's mansion, and the guy leading the charge had 2 gas cans under his arms. They were scaling the trees, jumping into the governor's mansion, over the fences and everything, and I just watched law enforcement right there. Every single one of them stood up and was a wall between disorder and lawlessness and the safety of my family. And I just remember being so incredibly grateful that they were holding the line. When they were getting pelted by bricks, there were water bottles that they were filling with urine. I know this is disgusting and not very first lady-like to say, but they were chucking them at the law enforcement, and man, those men and women, they just held their ground. And that to me was very special. So that's what you have to double down on. And that is going to give emotional well-being and support for law enforcement to know that at the end of the day, you've got good men and women like the governor and the lieutenant governor who believe in what you do, who are going to stand up and fight for you, whether it's salaries, raises, body armor, in the midst of the chaos. And that is how you continue to double down on the policies of what made Florida #1 in so many ways and a 50-year crime low.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. And some great legislation came out of that, of those riots, and we appreciate that.
No, I mean, we were the first. I mean, we, and you guys appreciate this, we banned defunding the police in Florida, right? Because it's like, most people realize that it's suicidal to do, but, any city council could end up with 3 bozos on it, right? And they can do stupid things. And so we basically made it so that if they did it, the money would go back in. And because ultimately, the citizens are the ones that are going to have to pay the price. But then we also provided real strong and clear rules about public disturbances. I mean, look, you can go in front of the governor's mansion and scream and MF me or whatever. That's fine. Like, the minute, though, you make an action against law enforcement, we're in a whole different ballgame. You don't have a First Amendment right, to chuck objects at law enforcement personnel. That is going into a riot. You don't have a right to shut down roads. And I know they tried to do it with the Hamas people. Miami police, they got them off very quickly. Our highway patrol got them off, etc. I mean, it just doesn't happen. We don't allow that. It's so disrespectful to other people, right? If you are surrounded by a mob, and the media hates this, but you have these people, the mob will surround their car, they're like a stoplight, and they drag the person out, start beating them. You are under no obligation to just sit there and take it. If they're doing that to you, you can flee to safety. And they go, oh, you can just run over protesters. No, you're not a protester if you're in the street banging on someone's car and threatening their lives. Big time penalties for going after law enforcement. And incidentally, while we're here, and I've said this the other day, but I'm going to reiterate it, Florida is not Portland. If you're attacking any law enforcement, but specifically ICE, with what the rhetoric that's out there about these folks, trying to engender hatred and attacks against them, you try that in Florida, you're going to wish you didn't. We're going to be very swift. We're going to be very severe in countering that. You can sit there. I mean, I actually believe that, we should have a border. I think the law should be enforced. I think if you come illegally, that you have to have a mechanism to enforce the law. I can tell you, if I showed up in France illegally and tried to work, they'd kick me out very quickly. So that's just my view. But if you have a different view, you know what? You can go and try to get the laws changed, right? But the ICE agents are fulfilling the mission that are in federal statutes. You have some people that don't like that. And so rather than try to actually win an election, and oh, by the way, you lost the election in part because the border was open. And so the public rejected that. So if you don't like it, you got to work to change. I don't think you'll be successful because but to take matters into your own hands and to try to, and they wanted to assassinate the ICE agents. They were firing into that van. It hit one of the illegals, but like they were going for the ICE agents. But some jurisdictions, they turn a blind eye to this. It's like, you can have all these disturbances, you can riot, and in Portland, they put you right back on the street like the next day. That's not going to happen here in the state of Florida. So I'm proud of the legislation we did. I think it's protected law enforcement. I think it's protected the public tremendously. And I'm glad that we were the first ones and probably the only ones to have done all that anywhere in the country.
Last question, and this is probably a tough one. This is for the governor. What reforms or initiatives are you most proud of when it comes to law enforcement?
Well, I think we've done a lot, and, we've talked about some, the bonuses. We did during COVID, I think we did 3 years in a row. We gave a $1,000 bonus to every sworn law enforcement officer. Not that that's like going to let you retire high on the hog or anything, but every little bit helps. But I think it was more just the signal it sent, at a time when law enforcement was being targeted and a lot of negativity. You're getting a letter and a check from the governor saying the state of Florida has your back. Here's appreciation. Do we do that? The signing bonuses, the scholarships for police academy, the strong legislation, all that. But I think just above all of that is just we had, and we still have, but not as bad as it was a few years ago, a climate that was hostile to law enforcement. And Florida, I think, was really instrumental in leading the nation in a different direction, leading the nation in terms of the truth, having to battle liberal media. Because, the reality is the media wants to create conflict between law enforcement and the populace. They want to try to impute motives to routine law enforcement actions to try to exacerbate tensions and divisions in society. And that just puts a target on the back of the people that wear the uniform. So I'm most proud of that, the fact that I could go to California, New York, Illinois, and have these people who I've never done anything for personally thanking me because we set the tone here. And nobody can have any ambiguity about where Florida stands in terms of supporting the men and women of law enforcement. The results speak for themselves. The results have been great. We got more. We're always going to have more to do. But I think it's just that 30,000-foot view. I don't care what the trends are. I don't care if I can get likes on social media by popping off like some of these politicians. I don't care about a photo op where I'm going to protest or any of that. I don't care about getting, positive legacy media because that's the only way they'll do it for me is if you embrace those types of things. I don't care about any of that. I care about doing what's right, and I care about true north, and that's what we've done. So it's been a lot of work. We've got more work to do, but man, I can tell you, sometimes you're like, oh, I wish I would have done this. I wish I'd done this. I'm glad everything we've done. I am glad that we've done. I think it's been important. I think you guys have done a great job, and it's just been a great relationship. So if every state mimicked Florida in our approach and policies, we would have less victims of crime throughout the United States of America, and that's just a fact.
And don't forget, the governor brought most, if not all, well, he's got a little work left on the pension reform. That's right. He had done a great job on that, and we appreciate that. That's all the questions I have.
Anything from the peanut gallery? Property, okay, yeah. So, look, property tax, people are getting pinched. These values are, first of all, if you buy a house for $300,000, then 10 years later the government's telling you it's worth $800,000 and you got to pay them more and you haven't sold it, that's just not right. And so you end up having these local governments like Broward, I was talking to some of the folks from there. They don't want to pay the sheriff's department or the deputies, but their budget is ballooned on all these other things. They've had no population increase in the last 5 years, but their budget's increased 60%. Why? It's because they're getting a gusher of property tax revenue, and rather than support law enforcement, rather than support taxpayers, they're pursuing their own agenda. And so, I think people need relief. So we're working through exactly what that would look like. But here's what I will just remind you of. If you look at all the revenue that local governments get from property tax, the majority, or no, 2/3 of it is not from primary residents for Floridians, okay? It's snowbirds, investment properties, commercial properties, probably closer to 70% of all the revenue. You really could, and then they get revenue sources from other ways. So if you look at the total amount of revenue that property tax makes up, it's probably about, for the bigger counties, probably about 20%, of everything they're doing. And so we're really focusing on, I don't care about a snowbird. I want them to pay taxes. Like I want less tax on Florida residents, and I'd rather have non-Floridians bear more of the burden. So, if these people have 20 Airbnbs, they should be the ones paying tax, and then the homeowner, your homesteaded property, that's where you target the relief to. So that's what we're going to be working on. But one of the things I think that we're looking at doing is requiring, so every Floridian homesteaded, you're going to get relief. I mean, obviously, I'd like it to be tax-free. I got to convince the legislature that. But we're also going to say is all the other property tax revenue you get from snowbirds, investors, commercial, all that, the revenue for that can only be used for public safety, schools, and some of the core things. Because if you just did that, you would guarantee the stream goes into the things that we actually support. Because what they like to do is spend on things that are not really necessary or popular. And then if you ever criticize, oh, you don't want to have police. Well, really? I don't want to have police? How come I put a lot of money into police? You don't want schools. Well, I put a lot of money into schools. So that's what they'll do. So say, okay, let's say, let's make sure that local government's taxing power, that if they're going to tax property, again, this is the snowbirds, everything, let's make sure that goes to schools and law enforcement and fire and the core things that we need for services. It should not go to paying a bureaucrat $350,000. It should not go to some of these ridiculous programs that they've tried to trot out that's wasted a lot of money. Blaise Angolia is our chief financial officer. He's been going through these counties. They just saw $270 million in Hillsborough County. Wasted money. You could do major reductions. So, and then also for some of the rural areas, I've calculated, so we have 30, of 67 counties, 32 are considered fiscally constrained. So their tax bases aren't the same as Orange or Broward or Miami-Dade, where you have a lot more tourism, all this other stuff. I've calculated it. If you eliminated on day one any tax from personal homesteaded properties in all 32 of those counties, I can backfill that for about $270 million a year. And that's budget desk. We got an $18 billion surplus. So, and we will do that. I will do that because I don't want there to be, oh, what are the rural's going to do? No, I'll backfill it. That's fine. I've got money to do it. But the way I view it is, if you look, groceries are very expensive and have been for many years now. You have issues with the prices of homes. Look, if you've owned a home for a while and the value appreciates, you have more equity if you're trying to buy a home. And that's a challenge for younger police officers. If they want to have families, they need to be able to afford a home. But we can't control the price. I mean, I do think that these things go up and down. I think we're probably going to have a correction. But the government doesn't control the price. Homeowners insurance. We've done a lot of reforms to try to shore up the market. We have more companies. They're actually in South Florida for the first time offering. Citizens in Miami-Dade reduced. You've seen stability. We have no storms this year. I do think you're going to start to see more reductions. And so that will be some relief, which is good. But at the end of the day, it's a private market. If I could just say everyone pays $5, it was in my control, fine, we would do that. But the one thing that's totally in our control, as Floridians working through our Constitution, is taxes. We completely control that. And so that, to me, is the easiest avenue to give relief to people who are seeing, just be much more expensive to live. And we're also, I've also, and this is kind of something that's under the radar, you're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence, and you're hearing a lot about building these data centers. Mark Zuckerberg's data center is almost as big as Manhattan. They use more power than cities that have 500,000 people. Massive amounts of water. Now, we don't have any of those big AI. I mean, people have their own little small, but like none of those of that scale. And part of it's like, look, I'm going to be very clear. I am not going to let a data center pass on the cost to you and have your electricity bills go up even more than they are. Electricity is skyrocketing throughout the United States of America, and part of it is because they use so much power. We don't have enough grid capacity to be able to handle all of this stuff. So in Florida, you got to pay your own way. If a company is doing look, I think a lot of this is mindless. I think some of these chat bots are just, it's not necessarily going to be revolutionary as much as the media likes to say. But be that as it may, we'll see, right? But we should not be making you pay more. We should not be saying you don't have access to the amount of water that you need because they're doing this stuff. And we're seeing that across the country. There's some parts of the country, they'll build one of these things in these rural areas, and they limit when the residents can shower because they don't have enough water for all this stuff. So this is going to be a big time flashpoint. And just know, I'm on the side of protecting the hardworking people of this state. If someone wants to build a business or build something like that, they got to do it on their own dime. It should not be subsidized by everybody else having to pay, up the nose for the necessities of life. So all that just being said, I'm just very sensitive as to, like, I think about when Casey and I got married. We got married at the very bottom of the housing bust. So, we bought a house, we got a good deal on it, like you started a life, eventually, had kids and everything, and we were able to do it. I mean, I was in the Navy at the time. I eventually ended up a U.S. congressman. She was a news reporter. So, we were doing well, like for the average, young couple, we were doing well. But today, I think about, almost everything seems like it'd be twice as expensive as it was back then. And so, I'm sensitive. We have seniors on fixed income who just keep having to pay these taxes. It's like, they'll say, oh, well, you're paying for schools. They've been paying for the schools for 40 years. Do they ever get a break from paying for this stuff? Come on. And so we got to give, so seniors need relief, but the young people need access to the American dream. And I think if we did property tax relief in a really significant way, you're basically allowing them to access this, I think, in a way where we're not trying to socially engineer. Because, like, sometimes it's like, oh, we want to improve home ownership. Let's, do funny business with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac like they did. Let's create these securities. Let's subsidize. Let's approve people that don't have the credit. Let's all that. Those are shortcuts that ultimately don't work. But if all you're saying is, you buy a house, we're not just going to the tax man ain't going to come after you, and that's your personal residence. We want you to be able to succeed. That's going to make a big, big difference for people. So we haven't put out a firm proposal yet. Some of the stuff you hear in the media, is inaccurate. I'm going to work with the legislature. I got to get 2/3 of the legislature to be willing to put it on the ballot, and then you guys will be able to vote in November of 26, and it needs 60%. And the reason is because the property tax is local. It's not state. We don't get any property tax revenue at the state. I've got a big surplus just on sales tax and dock stamp taxes and some of these things. So we don't need any of that. I want to give some of that surplus back to the people. And if I had an income tax, I'd cut it. We don't. We got rid of the business rent tax. It's eliminated. We've made a lot of these sales tax holidays permanent. You don't have to pay tax on disaster supplies. Back to school is permanent now. We have babies. Yeah, all the baby stuff. I didn't enact that until our third was out of diapers, but diapers are tax-free. I should have done it my first year. We'd have saved a lot of money. So you have all that, and I'm proud of that. So it's like, okay, the only thing that we can do on tax right now that would be meaningful is the property tax. And I'm not cutting taxes for investors or Airbnb or snowbirds. I want to cut taxes for Florida residents.
Sir, you mentioned some bozos out in the state of Florida. We still have some bozos as state attorneys. And I think we need to come to you, especially on one of them, and you really need to look at something.
So here's the thing on that. I think I'm the only one in America that's removed Soros-funded prosecutors from office. The reality is, of all the degradations we've seen in these urban areas across the country, if I had to pick the most significant reason, it would be the elevation of these prosecutors who basically refuse to hold the criminal element accountable. That causes a deterioration in the living standards. And so we did it in Hillsborough, and we saved that. And then we did it in Orange County in 2023 with Monique Borrell. What happened in 24? The guy removed in Hillsborough ran against my appointee, and he lost. Problem in Orange County? It's a very blue area, and so Worrell ran against my appointee, and I told him when he was a judge, and I appointed him, and I said, I was like, you need to be a Democrat. He's like, I ain't a Democrat. I'm like, well, the problem is it's a blue area, right? And so like you really got to win the Democrat primary. It's going to be harder for you to win as a Republican. But he was, look, I respected it. I mean, he's just not a Dem. So he did that, and so it was a presidential year. And she was able to do, and I think largely on the party label, right? I mean, this is these state attorney races are down ballot, and in a presidential year, I think it's more about the partisanship than necessarily who does the job. And so that wasn't unexpected, but what I did was right. And have her out of office when we did save lives. There's no question it did. So now she's in. So I haven't read this letter, but I know the Attorney General is doing a lot. Supposedly she declined prosecuting a case. You had some guy expose himself and was, I don't know if he was like masturbating in front of this kid, this young, very young kid. And she said, well, I disagree with it, but it's not criminal. The hell it's not criminal. Indecent exposure. I mean, like, come on. So we're going to review all that. But what I would tell all of you, I have authority under the Florida Constitution to suspend state attorneys and other officials from office. But there's criteria that has to be met. It can't just be that I don't like them or I disagree with them. And I'd have people, because I did some actions when I first became governor. We took very decisive action in a number of areas. And so then people just would say, "Hey, Governor, remove Jane Doe. I don't like her." No, that's not what it is. So the criteria are misfeasance, malfeasance, neglect of duty, drunkenness, incompetence. And honestly, I mean, I think the poor state attorneys, you probably could fit that bill. But I got to have the basis to do it. But I think I've shown I'm willing to do it. And of all the things we can do, any executive action I take in terms of like saving lives that doesn't involve the legislature per se, removing those really derelict prosecutors has probably been the thing that saved the most lives tangibly, because when they release these people back on the street, they commit more crimes. And there's more victims that are created. When they hold them accountable, it really has a great deterrent effect. So if there are folks in any of your jurisdictions, and I know there was a very close race in Palm Beach County. Really? And, again, it was a presidential year. It was harder to necessarily get oxygen on that. But there were some troubling statements and past from the candidate that ultimately won. If that is put into practice, where you're neglecting duty or you're committing misfeasance or you're just incompetent, we will obviously act on it. But I'm willing to do it. I just need to have the basis to do it. And this is true. Anything we do, I roll out of bed in the morning and some group is suing us on something. So, it ends up going and getting litigated and all this other stuff. And we always win on appeal. We usually don't win in the trial court because they forum shop and they go to liberal judges. But we usually win on appeal. And I would anticipate that if the basis is there, I have the authority. I think the Florida Senate and Jay's former colleagues, they're going to be very receptive to holding accountable a derelict state attorney, because I think they understand, too, that this is not fun and games. I mean, people's lives are at stake.
Thank you. Any other questions? Jimmy.
Governor, in your term, but you have done more for corrections, and I've been involved for 35 years than any other governor. Often when you speak, you refer to law enforcement officers, and under statute, correctional officers and probation officers are law enforcement officers, but when it comes to budget issue, there's a technicality because although they're law enforcement officers, they're not sworn. We believe that when you say this, that you include all of us, but unfortunately, when it goes to other people who handle the budget, they say, well, that's not what he meant. And I know how much you support us, and we would like to ask you what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a very important function. I absolutely mean to include everybody when I say that. We've done a lot, but we know we've got to do more, and I'm willing to do it. I think, the legislature, it just is what it is. I think this past session was, was not an example of how to do it right with how they handled the budget. It ended up being okay, but just there was a lot of proposals that were, quite frankly, out of character for what Florida has done. I mean, when you're, going after highway patrol, when you're taking away body armor, doing stuff like those were proposals that were there, right? And it didn't pass muster. But why not just keep doing what's working? Why not figuring out, what are the needs? And, we not only did we do more correction pay, I had National Guard supplementing for a long time, we did, because that's just what we saw was necessary. So, yes, so I do include, and I think it's important.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I got to go to the next one. God bless everybody. Thank you so much.